Welcome to the UFO Files. I'm your host, Ben Carter, and in today's episode we're diving into one of the most controversial and enduring stories in the history of UFO disclosure. A man who claimed to work on reverse engineering alien technology deep within the Nevada desert. His story has captivated believers and skeptics alike, fueled government secrecy theories, and raised one question that still haunts the world. What exactly did Bob Lazar see at Area 51? In the late 1980s, America stood at the edge of a technological revolution and the lingering shadow of the Cold War. The world had watched as computers shrank, satellites multiplied, and stealth aircraft took to the skies. It was a time when secrets were currency, and nowhere held more secrets than the arid, desolate stretch of Nevada, known only by its coordinates, Groom Lake. By then, whispers about experimental aircraft being tested in the desert were nothing new. Pilots reported lights that moved against the laws of physics, and locals spoke of strange hums echoing through the night. Against this backdrop of tension and transformation, Robert Scott Lazar emerged. He wasn't a polished government spokesman or decorated military officer. He was an outsider, a physicist with a self-proclaimed background in advanced propulsion systems and a story that would soon shake the foundations of what the public believed about UFOs. Lazar claimed to have been hired by the US government to work at a facility called S4, a highly restricted site near the infamous Area 51. According to Lazar, S4 wasn't simply a weapons testing ground, it was the epicenter of something far stranger. Hidden inside hangars camouflaged into the desert landscape, he said, were 9 flying saucers. He didn't just see them. He claimed to have worked on one, dismantling and studying its propulsion system, which, he insisted, was powered by an element not found on Earth at the time, element 115. The timing of Lazar's claims was as compelling as their content. UFO sightings had surged following World War II, and by the 1980s, the notion that the US government was hiding something had become a cultural undercurrent. Films like Close Encounters of the Third Kind and E.T. had captured the public imagination, but Lazar's testimony took things further. It didn't suggest inspiration, it alleged possession, not just of alien technology but of working craft. Lazar's background quickly became a point of contention. He claimed to have degrees from MIT and Caltech, yet no records could be found. Critics called him a hoaxer. Supporters claimed his records had been scrubbed, intentionally deleted to discredit him. Lazar, soft-spoken and analytical, never claimed to be a hero. He didn't sell books, he didn't host conferences. He simply recounted what he saw and then disappeared from the spotlight, only resurfacing years later. The story raised serious questions. If he was lying, how had he known about details that would only be confirmed years later, such as the existence of Area 51 itself, or the exact time and place where unusual lights would appear in the Nevada sky, which he predicted before journalists filmed them? If he was telling the truth, what did that mean for everything we thought we knew about our place in the universe? It was this strange mix of plausibility and mystery, technical detail and eerie silence, that gave Lazar's story the staying power it has today. Whether you believe him or not, his account marks a turning point in UFO history, when the idea shifted from unexplained lights in the sky to the chilling possibility that we had already captured something not of this Earth. It was in May of 1989 that Bob Lazar made his first public appearance, anonymously at first in an interview with investigative reporter George Knapp on Las Vegas's KLAS TV. His face was hidden and his voice altered as he described working at a facility south of Area 51 known only as S4. The facility, he said, was carved into the side of a mountain, concealed behind the illusion of barren desert. His job was to help reverse engineer the propulsion system of a craft he referred to simply as the sport model. Shortly afterward, Lazar chose to go public with his identity, believing he was being watched, followed, and possibly in danger. He claimed that by revealing himself, he might be safer, too visible to disappear without raising alarms. In the full interview, aired in November of that year, Lazar appeared on camera, openly stating that the United States government was in possession of 9 extraterrestrial craft. Each, he said, appeared to use a gravity-based propulsion system powered by a mysterious fuel. element 115, which at the time had not yet been synthesized by any scientific body on Earth. Lazar described the craft's propulsion unit as functioning on gravitational wave amplification, technology far beyond anything known to modern physics. According to him, the device produced its own gravitational field, which could bend space and allow the craft to fall into it, effectively manipulating space-time for interstellar travel. These weren't prototypes or reconstructions, he insisted. They were intact machines of unknown origin, some of which appeared to have sustained damage, while others looked as though they had been captured in pristine condition. The public reaction was immediate and divided. Some dismissed Lazar as a fantasist. Others found his level of detail and the consistency of his story too intricate to ignore. Reporters, researchers, and skeptics alike began to investigate. Journalists drove out to Groom Lake with cameras and captured strange lights maneuvering in impossible ways, right where Lazar said they would appear. Skeptics pointed out the lack of academic or employment records to back his claims. Lazar, in turn, accused the government of erasing his past. But it wasn't just the disappearance of credentials that raised questions. According to Lazar, during his time at S4, he was required to read briefing documents. These files suggested that the government had been involved with non-human entities for decades, that the technology was not only real but ancient, and that retrieval efforts dated back as far as the 1940s. He alleged that these documents referenced autopsies, historical sightings, and a systematic effort to keep the existence of these crafts from the public eye. He also described the internal procedures at S4 with remarkable specificity. Security was tight. Employees were transported in blacked-out buses. Each was assigned to work on only a small component of the craft, with little understanding of how the overall system functioned. Compartmentalization, he claimed, was extreme. No one was allowed to discuss their work, even with other staff members. This design, he suggested, was intended to limit what any single person could know. Despite the controversy, one fact remained consistent. Lazar never profited from his claims. He didn't publish a book, didn't go on tour, and showed little interest in fame. He appeared nervous in interviews, hesitant to speculate, and stuck to the same technical explanations year after year. Whether that indicated honesty or a rehearsed lie remained a matter of interpretation. But as strange sightings continued in the skies above Nevada, and as other insiders came forward with their own stories, the questions surrounding Bob Lazar only deepened. As public interest intensified, Lazar found himself at the center of an investigation that extended beyond mere curiosity. Journalists, scientists, and amateur researchers began digging into his claims, hoping to either validate or debunk the story that had captured so much attention. Lazar pointed investigators toward a particular ridge near Groom Lake, claiming that test flights were being conducted there late at night, often on Wednesdays. True to his word, several journalists, including George Knapp and a local film crew, observed unidentified lights darting across the sky in patterns no known aircraft could replicate. The lights would appear suddenly, hover in mid-air, shoot off at impossible speeds, and make abrupt 90-degree turns, movements that would have destroyed any conventional craft and its pilot. Lazar maintained these were test flights of the recovered saucers, and that the military was actively attempting to understand and replicate their propulsion. The footage gained traction, sparking nationwide discussions and reigniting interest in black-budget programs and the secrecy surrounding Groom Lake. For many, it was the first tangible confirmation that something unexplainable was happening in the Nevada desert. As interest surged, so did the risks. Lazar claimed his phones were tapped, that he was being followed, and that his life had become increasingly difficult. He told reporters that after going public, he had been fired from his job, threatened and stripped of access to his professional history. Attempts to verify his employment at Los Alamos National Laboratory, the same lab where he allegedly worked before being recruited for S4, led to more questions. Los Alamos denied he had ever been an employee. But reporters found a 1982 phone book listing Lazar as a staff member. A newspaper article from that same year profiled him as a scientist working on particle accelerators. The inconsistencies only added fuel to the fire. Meanwhile, physicists and propulsion experts began analysing Lazar's technical descriptions. He spoke of gravity wave amplifiers, a reactor core with no moving parts, and a fuel source, element 115, that could not be found on the periodic table at the time. The scientific community was sceptical. Element 15, later synthesized as moscovium in 2003, was highly unstable in laboratory conditions, disintegrating in less than a second. Lazar had described a stable isotope, one that could fuel gravity-powered travel and produce energy far beyond nuclear fusion. Critics pointed out that such a stable isotope of element 115 had never been observed. Supporters countered that just because it hadn't been found on Earth didn't mean it couldn't exist elsewhere in the universe, or be manufactured under unknown conditions. Lazar insisted that the element was provided to him in small quantities for testing, and that he witnessed firsthand the incredible power it generated when fed into the propulsion system. The device, he said, required no conventional wiring or combustion. It operated in total silence, emitted no heat, and manipulated gravity itself. The government remained officially silent. No agency acknowledged the existence of S4. Area 51 itself wasn't formally recognized until 2013, when declassified CIA documents confirmed its location and purpose as a testing ground for spy planes. But Lazar had described it in detail decades earlier. From the bus routes and security procedures to the internal layout of the facility, his knowledge seemed oddly specific for a man supposedly making everything up. The narrative reached a new level of intensity when Lazar's claims began aligning with emerging reports from other sources: military pilots, radar operators, and insiders who described craft that behaved in the same improbable ways. Whether by coincidence, intuition, or insider knowledge, Lazar had introduced a framework that others would come to echo, knowingly or not. The deeper investigators dug, the more the line between disinformation and suppressed truth began to blur. Among the most debated aspects of Bob Lazar's story was the alleged existence of physical evidence, tangible proof that something extraordinary was being hidden deep within the Nevada desert. While no photos or materials were ever presented directly by Lazar, his descriptions of the propulsion system and the fuel source became central to the search for verification. He maintained that the core of the alien technology hinged on element 115, a material he claimed had unique gravitational properties. In Lazar's words, this element served as both the reactor's fuel and the gateway to manipulating gravity itself. He described a small metallic disk of element 115 that powered a reactor unlike anything on Earth. According to Lazar, when bombarded with protons, the element would produce a powerful gravitational field. This field could be shaped and directed using a series of amplifiers, which then allowed the craft to distort space-time and move without traditional propulsion. It was a closed-loop system, he explained, producing immense energy without generating heat, noise, or radiation in the way nuclear power does. What Lazar proposed wasn't just new technology, it was a rewriting of physics itself. Skeptics quickly dismissed the claims as pseudoscience, arguing that element 150, if it existed, could not be stable. The synthetic version, moscovium, was eventually produced in particle accelerators, but only in tiny amounts, and it decayed in milliseconds. Lazar had anticipated this reaction. He asserted that the version synthesized in labs was not the same as the stable isotope used in the craft. The element in question, he said, was refined elsewhere, perhaps even off-world, and was fundamentally different in structure and behavior. Its apparent absence from Earth's natural elements, he argued, was precisely what made it so valuable. In addition to the fuel, Lazar described other components of the propulsion system with surprising technical clarity. There were 3 gravity amplifiers arranged beneath the craft, capable of rotating and shifting to direct the field. Above them sat a reactor core about the size of a basketball, suspended in a hemispherical chamber. Lazar claimed that when the system was powered up, the amplifiers distorted gravity in a focused direction, pulling the craft along the path of least resistance. It wasn't flight in the traditional sense, it was falling forward through space bent by gravity. He also detailed a control interface that seemed almost biological in nature, no visible wiring, no circuit boards. Instead, the ship responded to thought or intention, possibly through a form of neurological interface beyond modern understanding. The interior, he claimed, was compact and smooth, with no sharp edges or seams. The seats were small, designed for beings of slight stature. Every element of the craft seemed built with a non-human user in mind. These details, though unverifiable, sparked fascination among researchers. The concept of gravity propulsion, once confined to science fiction, was now being discussed in engineering circles and theoretical physics forums. Though no one could replicate what Lazar described, the ideas themselves began to influence conversations around advanced aerospace design. Adding to the mystery was a series of claims that the government had tested the craft in flight. Lazar stated he had witnessed test runs on multiple occasions, where the saucer would lift silently, wobble slightly as it stabilized, and then shoot off into the distance at speeds that defied explanation. The behavior matched what many pilots had reported in UFO sightings for decades: instant acceleration, no sonic boom, and sharp, sudden maneuvers that violated known laws of inertia. The absence of hard evidence, no videos, no samples, no blueprints, remained the central challenge to Lazar's credibility. But to those who believed him, the absence wasn't proof of deceit. It was a consequence of the very secrecy he claimed to expose. And the more that independent sightings aligned with his descriptions, the more the silence around his story seemed deliberate. The official response to Bob Lazar's claims was not immediate denial, but something far more subtle: silence, followed by a steady unraveling of his credibility. No press conference, no government-issued rebuttal. Instead, records that might support his story quietly vanished. Lazar said he had earned degrees from MIT and Caltech, but neither school had any documentation of his attendance. He insisted he had worked at Los Alamos National Laboratory, yet the lab stated there was no record of his employment. And yet, reporters unearthed a 1982 article from the Los Alamos Monitor profiling Lazar as a scientist at the lab, complete with a photo of him standing beside a particle accelerator. This paradox, of public evidence existing in defiance of official denials, set the tone for what followed. Lazar's supporters pointed to this as proof of a deliberate campaign to erase his professional past, a calculated effort to make him easier to discredit. His critics argued that the inconsistencies proved he had fabricated his credentials to bolster a hoax. But while the debate raged in media circles, a quieter, more systematic response appeared to be unfolding behind the scenes. Lazar began reporting surveillance, phone taps, and break-ins. He claimed his life had been upended by his decision to speak publicly. Former colleagues distanced themselves. His financial records came under scrutiny. At one point, he was arrested in connection with a prostitution ring, an event some suggested was a tactic to undermine his reputation. The deeper he pushed his claims, the more pressure seemed to bear down on his personal life. The air around Groom Lake itself grew more restricted. Where once curious onlookers could camp along the perimeter and hope for a glimpse of something unusual in the night sky, new warning signs and armed patrols became the norm. Roads were blocked. Airspace was closed. The official recognition of Area 51 wouldn't come until 2013, but the government's actions made it clear, whatever was happening there, it was not for public eyes. Despite the clampdown, Lazar's descriptions of the facility struck a chord with other alleged insiders. Years later, whistleblowers and former intelligence personnel would come forward with accounts that echoed his descriptions. Compartmentalized projects, deep underground installations, craft of unknown origin being studied by defense contractors and government scientists. The consistency between these later testimonies and Lazar's original story raised unsettling questions about the pattern of secrecy surrounding black-budget aerospace research. At no point did the military or intelligence community offer an official debunking of Lazar's statements. Instead, they allowed public opinion to fracture along predictable lines. Those inclined to believe saw a man targeted for revealing dangerous truths, while skeptics saw a fabricator who had managed to stay in the spotlight through charisma and coincidence. But the government's silence, its refusal to address Lazar directly, had its own weight. In an environment of information warfare and psychological operations, silence is often louder than denial. The few documents that did emerge from FOIA requests revealed more questions than answers. Funding allocated to exotic propulsion programs, mentions of advanced aerospace threats, unusual energy signatures observed during radar anomalies. All vague, but all pointing toward technologies not yet known to the public. Lazar's story, once considered fringe, began to intersect with real government projects in strange and compelling ways. As the 1990s progressed, the cultural conversation about UFOs evolved. What had once been relegated to conspiracy theory became a subject of mainstream inquiry. And though Lazar had largely withdrawn from the spotlight, the shadow he cast over Area 51 and the story of S4 continued to grow. With each leak, each new claim from within the defense world, the absence of a clear government response to Lazar's allegations became part of the mystery itself. Over the years, Lazar's credibility came to rest not only on his own statements but on the voices of others, people who had nothing to gain by stepping forward, and in many cases, everything to lose. These included military officers, radar technicians, engineers, and government contractors who began to share their own encounters, observations, and uneasy knowledge. Their stories often lacked the detail of Lazar's account, but the themes echoed one another with chilling consistency. One such account came from a former Navy radar operator who described tracking objects over the Pacific that moved with speed and precision no known aircraft could achieve. The objects would descend from altitudes above 80,000 feet to sea level in under a second, then vanish without a trace. His description bore striking resemblance to Lazar's claims about gravity-based propulsion systems: silent, instantaneous movement, no sonic boom, no visible means of lift or thrust. This operator had no connection to Lazar, yet the mechanics of what he described matched almost exactly. Then came the pilots. In 2004, the now famous USS Nimitz incident unfolded off the coast of California. Navy pilots reported a white, oblong craft hovering above the ocean, then darting away in a manner that defied inertia. The footage captured from their targeting systems, later verified by the Pentagon, reignited public interest in the UFO question. Lazar's name re-entered the conversation as comparisons were drawn between what the pilots had seen and the craft he had described nearly 2 decades earlier. Testimony from Luis Elizondo, a former intelligence officer who led the Pentagon's Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, AIP, added another layer. He spoke of vehicles capable of sudden acceleration, hypersonic speeds, and transmedium travel from air to sea to space, all without observable propulsion. These characteristics weren't merely similar to Lazar's descriptions. They were, in many ways, identical. The patterns of motion, the silence, the technology operating outside conventional physics, they all pointed to something far beyond current human capabilities. But perhaps most compelling were the accounts of other individuals who had worked near or within classified facilities. Some recounted strange briefings, others alluded to objects being moved under extreme secrecy. One contractor described seeing a disc-shaped craft inside a secured hangar in Nevada, though he was never told what it was or where it had come from. Another spoke of documents referencing non-human technology and the challenges of integrating it with existing defense systems. While none of these individuals could confirm Lazar's exact claims, their stories formed a patchwork of credibility, disparate but reinforcing. Lazar himself remained relatively quiet through much of this period. He granted occasional interviews, often reluctantly, and his tone never shifted. He didn't embellish, didn't revise. If he was fabricating the story, it was a fabrication frozen in time, immune to the influence of new revelations. That consistency, in a world of shifting narratives, was either a sign of careful lying or unshakable truth. Meanwhile, those who came forward echoed a recurring theme: fear. Fear of retaliation, of career ruin, of being labelled unstable or disloyal. This climate of suppression, real or perceived, lent further weight to the stories. The more reluctant the witnesses, the more their testimonies resonated. And as their voices joined the chorus, what began as a lone account in the Nevada desert began to resemble something far larger, a coordinated silence stretched across decades and disciplines. Whether through direct experience or second-hand knowledge, these voices formed a constellation around Lazar's original claims. They didn't confirm his story in full, but they didn't contradict it either. And in the world of classified intelligence and forbidden knowledge, that absence of contradiction may be as close to corroboration as the public will ever get. As stories from insiders continued to surface, a deeper question began to emerge. Not whether Lazar's claims were true in a literal sense, but what frameworks existed to explain the convergence of so many similar accounts. Mainstream scientists and skeptics attempted to provide rational explanations, pointing to atmospheric phenomena, experimental aircraft, and psychological suggestion. They argued that belief in UFOs often influenced perception, that people saw what they expected to see, particularly in high-stress environments like military operations or secret testing grounds. Aerospace experts, meanwhile, focused on plausible terrestrial sources. Some proposed that the craft witnessed by Lazar and others could have been classified prototypes from US black budget programs, advanced stealth aircraft or drones decades ahead of commercial understanding. The U-2 spy plane, after all, had caused a spike in UFO reports in the 1950s simply because it operated at altitudes no one believed possible at the time. Could the craft Lazar described have been similarly misunderstood, an Earth-made vehicle mistaken for alien technology by someone not given the full picture? Others, though, found this explanation lacking. The movements described by Lazar and corroborated by military pilots didn't conform to any known propulsion system. The gravity-defying maneuvers, the complete absence of heat signatures, the sudden accelerations without inertia, these behaviors weren't just improbable, they were impossible under the known laws of physics. Some physicists began to entertain more exotic ideas, that these craft operated using principles not yet discovered, or that they were not flying at all in the traditional sense, but manipulating the fabric of space itself. The fringe theories gained traction among those seeking alternative explanations. Lazar's concept of gravity wave amplification aligned loosely with aspects of general relativity and quantum field theory, though no laboratory evidence supported its feasibility. Still, theorists proposed that if such a system existed, it would require immense energy and an exotic fuel, like the element 115 Lazar described. Some speculated about extraterrestrial civilizations far older than our own, capable of engineering at scales we couldn't yet comprehend. Others moved into more speculative territory, that the craft were not alien, but interdimensional, manifestations from parallel realities intersecting briefly with our own. This theory attempted to account for the erratic behavior, the sudden appearances and disappearances, and the seemingly impossible feats observed by credible witnesses. It also suggested a reason for the government's silence, not just secrecy, but uncertainty, that even those in charge might not fully understand what they were witnessing or dealing with. There were also philosophical interpretations, that the technology, if real, represented a form of knowledge humanity was not yet ready to wield. Some drew comparisons to the myth of Prometheus, gods punished for giving fire to man. What if, they asked, the danger wasn't in the craft themselves, but in what they revealed about the universe, about time, about consciousness? If the implications were too disruptive, perhaps suppression wasn't just a power move, it was a form of containment. Mainstream media often painted these theories as fringe, yet the line between speculation and possibility continued to blur. With each new release of declassified footage, each statement from a former official, the idea of non-human technology became incrementally less absurd. Even the Pentagon began to shift its language. Terms like unidentified aerial phenomena replaced UFOs, and official channels began investigating sightings with seriousness once considered unthinkable. Through it all, Lazar's story held steady. Whether viewed through the lens of advanced physics, intelligence strategy, or metaphysical inquiry, his claims had opened a window that could not be easily closed. Theories evolved, but the center remained. An engineer from Nevada who said he saw something not of this earth. And no matter how the story was approached, through skepticism, science, or belief, it always seemed to circle back to that one possibility, that we are not alone. As the Lazar narrative continued to pulse beneath the surface of mainstream discourse, patterns began to emerge in other parts of the world, incidents and investigations that mirrored the themes first brought into focus by his testimony. In Russia, Brazil, Iran, and across NATO airspace, encounters with unidentified aerial phenomena displayed the same impossible characteristics. Propulsion without exhaust, craft without wings, acceleration without inertia. What Lazar described at S4 was not confined to a single desert facility. It was, increasingly, part of a global phenomenon. In 1976, Iranian fighter jets were scrambled to intercept a glowing object over Tehran. Both planes experienced simultaneous weapons and communications failure as they approached the target, an encounter later documented in a US intelligence report. In Brazil, Operation Saucer, a secret military investigation in the 1970s, documented dozens of encounters in the Amazon, complete with photos and eyewitness testimonies. The objects behaved in eerily familiar ways, emitting concentrated beams of light, maneuvering at extreme speeds and exhibiting an awareness of human presence. Japan, Australia, Chile and Belgium all recorded radar visual cases where unknown craft penetrated restricted airspace, evaded pursuit and vanished without a trace. In 1990, Belgian F-16s engaged a black triangular object that defied known flight mechanics. Ground-based radar confirmed the target, and pilots reported being outrun with ease. The triangle-shaped craft fit a description Lazar never personally gave, but one that still appeared to share core traits with the sources he claimed to study: gravity-defying motion, silent flight, and abrupt directional changes. What connected these global reports wasn't just behavior, but secrecy. In nearly every case, governments withheld data, denied involvement, or quietly classified the material. The public was given little more than denials or redacted documents. This worldwide veil of silence echoed the compartmentalization Lazar described at S4. No matter the country, the pattern remained: minimal transparency, ambiguous language, and just enough disclosure to satisfy curiosity without confirming anything definitive. Civilian sightings, too, began to follow a recognizable script. Individuals from all walks of life described encounters with craft that moved against the wind, hovered without sound, or shot upward at impossible speeds. Many reported nausea, disorientation, or lost time, phenomena often reported in abduction cases, though never conclusively linked to any specific cause. Some researchers noted that descriptions of the interiors of craft matched closely across testimonies from different countries and decades. Smooth walls, seamless surfaces, oddly shaped control panels, and an absence of visible mechanics. Features consistent with Lazar's own account. Even within classified channels, there were hints of something broader. Internal documents from intelligence agencies occasionally surfaced, revealing concern over the consistency and persistence of these phenomena. Declassified memos discussed propulsion systems that challenge our current understanding of physics, and pilots were instructed not to discuss encounters outside of official debriefings. The stigma remained, but behind closed doors, a different reality was taking shape. The convergence of these global cases did not confirm Lazar's story, but they rendered it harder to dismiss. The details he introduced, elemental fuels, gravity manipulation, exotic craft, were now interwoven with a tapestry of evidence too vast to ignore. From the Nevada desert to the Amazon rainforest, from radar rooms to cockpit recordings, a pattern was forming, too precise and too persistent to be coincidence. And while Lazar remained a solitary figure, the phenomenon he described had become unavoidably collective. What Bob Lazar set in motion in 1989 remains unresolved, suspended in the space between belief and denial, between science and speculation. More than 3 decades have passed since he first stepped onto the airwaves and described a world hidden beneath the surface of our own, one where alien technology was not just real, but actively being studied in secret. His story, despite all scrutiny, has endured with remarkable resilience, not because it was sensational, but because so many of its threads continue to resurface in credible, independent ways. The lack of definitive proof has never killed the story. On the contrary, the persistent absence of resolution has only deepened the intrigue. When governments began releasing UAP footage and admitting encounters with craft of unknown origin, the needle moved. Public discourse shifted. Journalists began to treat the subject with seriousness. Scientists entered the conversation. And yet, the core mystery remained untouched. The videos lacked context. The statements avoided conclusions. We were told something was there, but never what. In that void, Lazar's account retains a strange kind of gravity. His descriptions of element 115, gravity propulsion, and compact saucer-shaped craft still match what pilots and analysts have described in more recent encounters. The technology he claimed to witness is no longer easily dismissed as fantasy, especially when defense officials now publicly state that certain aerial vehicles appear to outmatch anything in the known arsenal of Earth's militaries. That a man with no official support, no institution behind him, and no financial motive could describe these systems in 1989 and be echoed piece by piece decades later. This fact lingers like a riddle with no answer. And yet, contradictions remain. The absence of academic records, the inability to independently verify much of his past, the lack of physical evidence he could provide. These are not trivial concerns. They continue to feed the argument that Lazar was a skilled fabricator, perhaps not maliciously, but with just enough technical fluency to build a narrative people wanted to believe. If that's the case, then his was one of the most convincing deceptions in modern American folklore. But if he was telling the truth, the implications are staggering. It would mean that not only have we made contact with technology of non-human origin, but that we have, for decades, attempted to reverse engineer it, to replicate it, to understand the minds that created it. It would mean that secrecy, not ignorance, is the primary reason we remain in the dark. That behind the fences and classified projects, someone knows more. Perhaps far more. In the end, the story of Bob Lazar is not just about flying saucers or secret bases. It's about the boundaries of knowledge and how society responds to the unexplained. It's about the price of disclosure, the cost of belief, and the terrifying possibility that the world is stranger than we've been told. Whether Lazar was a hoaxer, a whistleblower, or something in between, his legacy persists, not in answers, but in questions. And for many, those questions are far more dangerous than any truth. Thanks for listening. This has been another episode of the UFO Files. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you'd like to support the show, subscribe to the UFO Files on Spotify. Subscribe now.